The cabin lights flickered like dying fireflies as we began our descent into New York's JFK Airport. 10 hours. That was the time I had spent strapped to seat 109, squeezed between a guy who spent the entire flight arguing with the entertainment system's touchscreen and a woman who kicked me in the shin every time she adjusted her blanket. My body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder, shredded, destroyed, and slightly dizzy. But I didn't care. I was almost there. I grabbed my phone, ignoring the 127 unread emails, and instead pulled up the last picture I had of Grayson. It was from 2 weeks ago, a selfie we'd taken in our Chicago kitchen. He was smiling, looking tired but handsome in that very specific way venture capitalists always look when they pretend to be normal people. "I love you, honey," I whispered to the screen, tracing the curve of his jaw with my thumb. "Just wait until you see the surprise." The surprise was me flying economy from Athens to New York on a moment's notice because Grayson had casually mentioned over FaceTime that his sister Martha's wedding was going to be a low-key affair, and he didn't want me stressing over such a long flight. 3 days later, I saw the invitation on his mother's Facebook. A glossy, professionally shot save the date for a black tie summer gala at the Sullivan family estate in East Hampton. Low-key, sure. So I liquidated some of my remaining blue-chip stocks. I booked the first flight I could afford and did something I hadn't done in years. I packed a bag with a plan. I wasn't just Eleanor Sullivan, the stay-at-home wife, while her husband played pretend billionaire. I was Eleanor Black, the corporate litigator, who once made a boardroom full of senior partners at Sterling & Pierce fall dead silent just by raising an eyebrow. And Eleanor Black was furious. The plane touched down with a jolt that made me grit my teeth. I was out of my seat before the seatbelt sign even blinked off, dodging overhead bins and elbowing my way past the slow-moving passengers, treating deplaning like a Sunday stroll. I sprinted down the jet bridge, my carry-on banging against my leg. I needed to hit the Hertz counter, pick up my rental, and drive the 2 hours to the Hamptons before the reception really kicked into high gear. I had timed it perfectly, except for one thing. By the time I pulled up to the place, a massive, column-heavy monstrosity that looked less like a home and more like a Greek temple dedicated to old money dusk was already settling in. String lights were draped across the flawless lawn, casting a sickeningly perfect glow over the 100 or so guests mingling in their cocktail attire. I parked my rental, a nameless Ford Focus that felt like a betrayal compared to my BMW sitting back home, and took a deep breath. I smoothed out the travel wrinkles in my Carolina Herrera wrap dress, the one I'd bought specifically for this trip, and marched toward the entrance. That's when I saw him. Richard Sullivan, my father-in-law, stood there holding a crystal glass of what was likely a 40-year-old Macallan, looking like he'd stepped straight out of a 1995 Brooks Brothers catalog. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. His navy blazer sported those leather elbow patches that screamed pretension, and his eyes, the same cold gray as a winter sky, were locked dead on me. My heart skipped a beat. For a second, I thought maybe he was expecting me. Maybe Grayson had told him I was coming. I forced a smile, pushing my sunglasses up into my hair. "Richard," I said, my voice raspy from the flight. "Surprise!" He didn't move. He didn't smile. He just stood there, taking a slow sip of his whiskey as I approached. When I was close enough to count the pores on his nose, he finally spoke. "Eleanor." Just my name. Dry, inflectionless, like he'd just noticed a stain on the rug. "Hi," I said, my smile wavering. "I know it's a little last minute, but I got here as fast as I could. Is Grayson inside?" Richard lowered his glass, His gaze raked over me with the precision of a butcher inspecting meat. His eyes lingered on the wrinkles in my dress, the faint dark circles under my eyes, the sensible low heels I'd worn to sprint through the airport. "Here is the thing," he said, his voice low and clipping heavy with that elite East Coast drawl. The invitation was specific: immediate family only. And while you technically hold a title within this family, you were not on the list. I blinked. The world seemed to tilt on its axis for a second. What? You heard me. He shifted his weight, effectively blocking the path to the door. This is a private event for the Sullivan family, not for freeloaders who can't even be bothered to book a decent flight. The words hit me with physical force. Freeloader. I looked past him into the glowing warmth of the house. I could hear laughter, the clinking of glasses, the low hum of a string quartet. I saw Martha Grayson's younger sister, fluttering around in a cloud of tulle, and there, right by the bar, was Grayson, my husband. He was talking to someone, his head thrown back in a laugh I knew intimately. Right beside him was a woman in a red dress, her hand resting far too intimately on his forearm. She was young, entirely too young, and she was wearing a diamond bracelet that looked suspiciously like the one I'd found in Grayson's glove compartment last month. The same one he swore was a gift for a client. "Richard, please," I said, my voice cracking. I tried to step around him, but he cut off my movement, his shoulder bumping mine. "Let me pass. Grayson is waiting for me, really." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Because I just spoke to him 10 minutes ago, and he somehow forgot to mention his wife was going to crash the party? Frankly, Eleanor, you should have called. It is incredibly embarrassing for you to just show up unannounced like this. You make the family look bad." Family. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I had spent 12 years trying to be part of this family. 12 years biting my tongue at country club dinners, ignoring their casual classism, pretending their passive-aggressive comments about my working-class Chicago roots were just jokes. And this was my reward: humiliation. I fumbled for my phone, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. I dialed Grayson's number. It rang once, twice, and went straight to voicemail. Sure. I tried again. Same result. "He's busy," Richard said, a smug little smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Why don't you head back to the city? I'm sure there's a motel that will take you at this hour." I stared at him, at the man who had walked me down the aisle 12 years ago and patted my shoulder telling me I was lucky to have snagged his son. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slap that condescending smirk right off his Botox-smoothed face. But I didn't. I was Eleanor Black, and Eleanor Black didn't make scenes. She built cases. So I took a step back, then another. My vision blurred, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not in front of him. "You're making a mistake," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Richard simply shrugged, his attention already drifting back to the party. "Have a safe flight back, Eleanor." I stood there on the gravel driveway for what felt like an eternity, watching the silhouettes of the happy couple through the window. Grayson spun the girl in the red dress. She threw her head back laughing, and he leaned in to kiss her neck. My stomach violently churned. I spun on my heels and marched back to the rental car. The engine roared to life, sounding far too loud on the quiet, tree-lined street of the Hamptons. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Richard was still there, his glass raised in a mocking toast. I drove for miles without a destination, the GPS guiding me to nowhere. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheel straight. Finally, I pulled into a rest stop on the Long Island Expressway. The humid night air did nothing to dissolve the knot in my throat. I unlocked my phone. I finally had a signal. Dozens of notifications flooded in at once. One was a text from Grayson, sent 2 hours ago. "Hey, just landed, running late, don't wait up." Wake up. Another was an Instagram notification. Martha had posted a story. It was a boomerang of Grayson grinning like an idiot, holding a champagne flute. The caption read, "Best brother in the world. Thanks for saving the day, Gray." And there in the corner of the screen was the girl in the red dress. Her bracelet sparkled under the camera flash. I stared at the screen until the image burned into my retinas. Then I took a deep, shuddering breath and typed a reply to Grayson's text. "We need to talk. Now." I hit send. The message failed to deliver, not because of a bad signal, but because he had blocked me. A harsh, dry sound escaped my throat. A laugh, a sob. I wasn't sure. I checked the dashboard clock. It was 8 in the evening. The wedding reception was in full swing. I went back to my phone not to call Grayson, but to open my banking app. I stared at the numbers. The offshore account. The one Grayson didn't know about. The one I had been quietly padding for years with the freelance legal consulting gigs I took on the side. The ones I told him were just for fun. It was a lot of money. More than enough. My finger hovered over the transfer button. No, not yet. First, I needed to get to a hotel. I needed to sleep. I needed to think. But as I merged back onto the highway, joining the flow of traffic heading toward Manhattan, a different sensation began to replace the grief. It started as a tiny spark, deep in my gut. Cold, hard, focused. By the time I checked into a hotel in Midtown Manhattan, the spark had turned into a roaring flame. I dropped my bags in the sterile, impersonal suite and stood in the middle of the room, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back wasn't the exhausted, betrayed wife from East Hampton. She was a litigator, and she was ready to go to trial. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct made me answer. "Hello?" Silence. Then, a familiar voice, slurred with alcohol and arrogance. "Eleanor, it's Grayson." My blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Doesn't matter," he snapped, his tone shifting from surprised to irritated in a heartbeat. "What the hell are you doing in New York? And why did you try to ruin Martha's wedding? Do you have any idea how much you embarrassed me?" I closed my eyes, picturing him, probably still in his tuxedo, reeking of booze and privilege. "I embarrassed you?" I repeated. "I flew 10 hours to be with my husband. Your father humiliated me in front of 100 people." "Oh, come on," he scoffed. "Dad was just messing around. You always take everything so personally. Look, I'm sorry about the mix-up, but you shouldn't have just shown up unannounced. That's not how things are done in this family." Family. I repeated the word in my mind. His voice was practically dripping with condescension. "Anyway, listen, I don't have time for this. I'm calling because the wedding bill just came in. It's a disaster. 50 grand over budget." I blinked. "Excuse me? 50 grand? Eleanor, the caterer, the flowers, the band, they're all demanding payment. And since you're the one who technically signed the initial venue contract—" "I signed it as a favor to your mother," I cut in, my mind racing. "I didn't authorize an overage." "Well, you signed it," Grayson said, his voice hardening, "which means we are both legally on the hook. So I need to know how you want to handle this, because I am not paying for Martha's extravagance. This is on you." I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking under my weight. The number echoed in my head. He wasn't asking me. He was ordering me. He was telling me that the price of his sister's wedding, a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend, was now my problem. I could hear music and laughter in the background. I could hear the girl in the red dress giggling. Something inside me snapped. The last frayed thread of the woman who loved Grayson Sullivan dissolved into nothingness. In its place, something new emerged. Something razor sharp. How do I want to handle it? I repeated, the ghost of a smile brushing my lips. Yeah, he said impatiently. Cash, check, wire transfer, whatever. Just take care of it. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The flame in my gut was a roaring inferno now. Don't worry, Grayson, I said, my voice smooth as silk. I'll take care of it. He paused, clearly caught off guard by my quiet acceptance. You will? Yes. Just text me the vendor info. I'll have it sorted by Friday. The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the black screen. Then, slowly and deliberately, I opened my banking app again. I looked at the balance of my secret account. It was more than enough to cover the 50 grand without breaking a sweat. But I wasn't going to pay a single cent. Instead, I opened a new email. The address was a burner account I'd created years ago, back when I was still making enemies in the corporate world. The subject line was simple, regarding the wedding invoice. I typed 3 words. Let's play ball. Then I saved it to drafts. I wouldn't send it just yet. First, I needed to gather my ammo. First, I needed to figure out exactly what kind of game we were playing. I stood up, walked over to the minibar, and poured myself a glass of cheap bourbon. It burned on the way down, a harsh contrast to the smooth, aged Macallan Richard had been sipping. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. To family, I murmured, tossing the drink back in one go. He made the first move. I would make the last. And when the dust settled, Grayson Sullivan and his precious family would wish they had never heard the name Eleanor Black. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. It rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. Sterling and Pierce, Ray Sterling speaking. Ray, I said, my voice steady and clear. It's Eleanor. I need a favor. The silence in my hotel suite was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the cheap alarm clock on the nightstand. It was 2:17 in the morning. I hadn't slept. Instead, I had spent the last 5 hours doing what I do best, investigating. My laptop screen was a grid of open tabs, bank records, property deeds, corporate filings for Sullivan Holdings, LLC, and a particularly interesting dossier on one Bridget Sampson, event planner. Ray Sterling's voice kept echoing in my head. Eleanor, you fell off the map once. I didn't think you'd do it again. He hadn't sounded angry, just curious, concerned, like a professor whose star pupil suddenly drops out to become a yoga instructor. When I told him I needed access to public records, specifically anything related to the Sullivan family and their recent financial transactions, he didn't ask questions. He just gave me a secure link and a password. Careful what you dig up, he had warned me. Some people don't like their skeletons dragged into the light. I had every intention of dragging them all out. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against my empty water glass. It was a text from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even looked. We need to talk about the money. Call me. No hello. No how are you. Just a demand. Classic Grayson. I left him on red for a solid 10 minutes. Then I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, sounding breathless like he was pacing. Finally, he snapped. Do you have any idea what time it is here? It's a little past 2:30. I said, my voice cold and professional. I was sitting at a desk, not lying in bed, and I made sure my posture reflected that. In London, where I just flew in from, it's noon. I haven't slept, Grayson, unlike you, who was probably blackout drunk at your sister's wedding, right after making me feel like a criminal for showing up. A pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to recalibrate. He shifted tactics. Okay, look, I'm sorry about my dad. He can be difficult, but that's beside the point. The point is, we have a massive problem. Martha's wedding cost a fortune. The final bill is 50 grand over what we projected. I see, I said, pulling up the spreadsheet I'd been building. And how exactly did it go 50 grand over budget? It doesn't matter how, he yelled, and I heard a muffled thud like he'd slammed his hand on a table. The caterer, the florist, the band, they all want to get paid. And since you technically signed the contract, I didn't authorize an overage, I cut him off, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Nor did I agree to act as the primary guarantor for Martha's impulsive decisions. You're legally trapped, he said, dropping his voice to a menacing growl. We both are, which means if we don't pay, they'll sue. And a lawsuit like that will drag my name through the mud. Think about the optics, Eleanor. I'm about to close a massive funding round for my new venture. I can't afford this kind of disaster. There it was, the real reason. It wasn't about the money. It was about his precious reputation. So you want me to pay it, I stated. I didn't ask. I want us to figure it out, he corrected, but the implication was clear. Look, I'm illiquid right now. The prenup is ironclad. You know that. I can't just pull 25 grand out of thin air. All my cash is tied up in the new fund. He was lying. I had seen the wire transfer receipts from the sale of his last startup. The money was there. He just didn't want to spend his own. What about your dad? I asked, leaning back in my chair. He threw the party. He practically forced Martha to have it at his country club. Why doesn't he foot the bill? Grayson let out a short, bitter laugh. Are you kidding? Dad fronted the cash for the rest of it. He expects us, you and me, to cover the overage. It's called family responsibility, Eleanor. Something you never seem to quite grasp. Family responsibility. The phrase made my skin crawl. It was the exact same emotional blackmail Richard used to guilt me into organizing his annual Christmas galas, donating to his favorite charities, and keeping my mouth shut while he made disparaging remarks about my background. Fine, I said, letting the word hang suspended between us. I'll handle it. He exhaled audibly. I could hear the arrogant smirk returning to his voice. Good. I knew you'd be reasonable. I'll forward you the vendor info. There's a wire transfer form attached. Just get it done by Friday. And Eleanor, try not to screw this up. Just pay the bill so we can move past this incredibly awkward weekend. The call dropped. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then slowly set it down on the desk. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. What I felt was cold, sharp, and precise. It was the feeling I used to get right before delivering a closing argument. I opened the forwarded email. Attached was a PDF from a company called Hampton's Luxury Events, owned by one Bridget Sampson. The invoice was itemized, but only vaguely. It listed premium buffet catering at $350 per head for 120 guests. That right there was over 40 grand. Then came floral design and installation for $15,000. Eden String Quartet for $2,000. And at the very bottom, a line item that made my blood run cold. Miscellaneous event upgrades, $10,000. Upgrades. What kind of upgrades cost 10 grand? I clicked on the secure link Ray had sent me, logging into the New York State Department of State's corporate registry database. I typed in Bridget Sampson. A few clicks later, I had her business license, her registered agents, and a curious little lien filed against her by a former employee for unpaid wages. Interesting. Next, I cross-referenced the vendor names with public records. The catering company, Gourmet Banqueting, was owned by a man named Anthony Faria. A quick search revealed that Anthony Faria also happened to be the treasurer of the exact same country club where Richard Sullivan sat on the board of directors. Coincidence? Hardly. I spent the next hour building a case. Screenshots, links, notes. By the time the sun began to rise over Manhattan, painting the skyscrapers in shades of pink and gold, I had a crystal clear picture. This wasn't just a wedding that went over budget. It was a conspiracy of convenience. Richard used his connections to hire his buddies' companies. They inflated the invoices. Grayson, the golden boy, was supposed to just pay up and look the other way. And I, the outsider, was meant to be the ultimate deep pocket. They had underestimated me. They had treated me like a commodity, a slush fund to tap into whenever they needed cash. They forgot that I was a corporate litigator. I didn't just read contracts. I gutted them. I ordered room service a pot of black coffee and dry toast and stood staring out the window at the waking city. People were rushing to work, hailing cabs, living their lives. None of them knew a hurricane was brewing in a midtown hotel room. My phone buzzed again, this time an email from Grayson. The subject line read, "Reimbursement." He had attached a screenshot of a wire transfer form already filled out with my name and account number. The amount was $25,000. Under memo, it read, Martha's wedding overage. Below that, his email was short and blunt. Eleanor, stop dragging your feet. The vendors are getting antsy. Pay the bill so we can move on. I stared at the email. Then I did something I'd been planning since the moment Richard blocked my path at the driveway. I forwarded the email, along with the complete invoice and my preliminary findings, to 3 people. The first was Bridget Sampson, the wedding planner. Subject: Inquiry regarding invoice number 47W. The second was Richard Sullivan. Subject: Transparency and Family Finances. The third was Martha Sullivan. Subject: Your wedding bill. The body of the email to all 3 was identical. To whom it may concern, I am writing to request a comprehensive, itemized breakdown of the charges listed on the attached invoice for the recent Sullivan wedding. Specifically, I am interested in clarifying the $10,000 charge for miscellaneous event upgrades and the $6,000 charge for the surprise fireworks display, which, according to multiple eyewitness accounts, including my own from the road, did not take place. As the co-signer of the initial venue contract, I have a legal right to a full accounting of these funds. Please provide this documentation by end of day Friday, or I will be forced to escalate this matter to the Better Business Bureau, the State Attorney General, and the appropriate regulatory agencies. Sincerely, Eleanor Black Sullivan. I hit send on all 3. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I knew would provoke a reaction. It rang 4 times before a groggy, irritated voice answered. "Who is this?" Richard Sullivan grumbled. "Richard," I said, my voice bright and cheerful. "It's Eleanor. I hope I didn't wake you. I just sent you an email. I'm sure you'll find it illuminating." There was a beat of silence. Then I heard the rustle of sheets, followed by the sound of a laptop clicking open. A few seconds later, his voice shifted. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. "What the hell is this?" he roared. "What kind of game are you playing, you ungrateful little—" "I'm not playing a game, Richard," I cut him off mid-insult. "I'm just asking for transparency. You taught me that, remember, always know where your money is going. Well, I intend to know. And if I don't get answers, I'll be contacting the Attorney General, the IRS, and my own legal counsel. All before lunch." "You wouldn't dare," he whispered. "Oh, wouldn't I said, catching the challenge in his voice. "Test me, Richard. If you or anyone else ever contacts me about this invoice again, you'll be speaking directly to my lawyer. Have a lovely morning." I hung up before he could respond. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. Adrenaline. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Grayson. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and placed it face down on the desk. The next call was from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct kicked in again. "Hello, Mrs. Sullivan?" A hesitant female voice. "This is Bridget Sampson. I just got your email." I smiled. Here we go. "Miss Sampson," I said smoothly. "Thank you for getting back to me so quickly. I assume you received the invoice and my request for clarification." "Yes, I got it," she stammered. "And I just want to say I am so sorry for the mix-up. That $10,000 charge was a mistake, a clerical error. It was actually for the extra security detail your father-in-law requested at the last minute." "And the fireworks?" "Yeah, it was too windy, so we called them off. I must have forgotten to adjust the final bill." "Security detail. What security detail?" "There were no paparazzi at that wedding. Unless—" "I see." I filed that little nugget of information away for later. "And the $6,000 for the canceled fireworks?" "Oh, that was absorbed into the floral budget," she said quickly. "Please, Mrs. Sullivan, can I just issue you a corrected invoice today? I'm just begging you not to report me to the Attorney General. My business wouldn't survive a hit like that." "I'm glad we could clear this up, Miss Sampson," I said. "Send me the corrected invoice, and if I see any more clerical errors, I won't be quite so understanding." I hung up, feeling a slow satisfaction spread through my chest. 1 down, 2 to go. My phone buzzed again. A text from Martha. "Oh my God, Eleanor, what is going on? Dad is having a meltdown. He says you're going to sue him. Please call me. This isn't fair. I worked so hard on my wedding." I didn't reply. Let her sweat. Let them all sweat. I stood up and stretched. The stiffness from sitting so long was finally catching up with me. I walked over to the minibar and grabbed another mini bottle of bourbon. I didn't even bother with a glass. I just unscrewed the cap and took a swig. It tasted harsh, but it went down beautifully. I checked the clock. 7:45 a.m. I had maybe an hour before the real counterattack began, before Grayson and Richard regrouped and came at me with everything they had. But I wasn't worried. I went to my laptop and opened a new document. The title was simple. Case Notes. Sullivan versus Sullivan. Preliminary Findings. Beneath it, I typed a single sentence. Plaintiff alleges a pattern of financial mismanagement, fraudulent misrepresentation, and emotional coercion, with the defendant's own actions serving as Exhibit A. I saved the file. The game had just begun. And for the first time in 12 years, I was playing to win. The first shot, unsurprisingly, came from Grayson. This time, it wasn't a phone call. He knew better. It was an email sent to my private account, CCing his lawyer. The subject line was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Unfortunate misunderstanding regarding family finances. I almost laughed. Misunderstanding. How ironic. I opened the attachment. It was a cease and desist letter drafted by some two-bit attorney he'd probably found on the internet. It accused me of making baseless, defamatory claims against upstanding members of the community, demanding I retract my emails and cease all further communication. It was laughable. A boilerplate template. The only name on it was some junior associate's. The senior partner's signature was glaringly absent. They were testing the waters. I forwarded it to Ray Sterling with a single note. Thoughts. His reply came 10 minutes later. Amateur hour. Ignore them. They're scared. Scared. Yeah, that was the scent in the air. Fear. The Sullivans operated under the assumption that their wealth and social standing made them untouchable. They were about to learn that paper tigers burn easily. At 9:15 a.m., my phone rang. Private number. Pick up, Eleanor. Richard Sullivan's voice was different. This time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by a tight, pleading tone. We need to talk this out calmly, like adults. I'm listening, I said, spinning my chair around to look out the window. The city was fully awake now, a hive of activity. I felt a strange sense of peace watching it. The email, he started, his voice strained. It was mishandled. Bridget is an idiot. She should have itemized everything from the start, but this threat to go to the authorities is taking it too far. Eleanor, it makes us all look bad. All of you? I repeated. Or just you, Richard? He sighed, a long theatrical sound. Look, I admit there might have been some creative accounting to maximize the tax benefits of the family trust, but you have to understand that's just how business is done. It's fraud, I corrected him, and you dragged me into it by putting my name on that contract. You signed it of your own free will, he countered, his temper flaring. As a favor to your mother-in-law, a favor you're now trying to weaponize against me. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Here's what's going to happen, Richard. You're going to call off your attack dogs. The wedding planner, the caterer, all of them. You're going to tell them I am not responsible for a single red cent of that overage. Then, you're going to call your son and tell him to stop harassing me. And if I don't, he asked, the threat hanging heavy in the air. If you don't, I said, dropping my voice to a whisper, on Monday morning, I will walk into the IRS office in Lower Manhattan with a binder full of invoices, bank statements, and a sworn affidavit explaining exactly how Richard Sullivan used his daughter's wedding as a personal tax write-off. The line went dead. He'd hung up on me, but I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I had the receipts. 5 minutes later, my phone pinged with a text. It was from Grayson. What the hell did you say to my dad? He just called me screaming. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Just pay the bill, Eleanor. It's not worth destroying the family over. I stared at the text. Destroying the family. He was the one who banned me from the wedding. He was the one sleeping with another woman. He was the one trying to stick me with a fraudulent bill. I didn't reply. I had bigger fish to fry. I opened my laptop and logged into the corporate registry for Sullivan Holdings, LLC. I'd been there before, but this time I was looking for something specific. Board members, directors, financial disclosures. It was a private company, so information was limited, but not non-existent. I found what I was looking for buried in an annual report from 3 years ago. A list of properties owned by the LLC. One of them was a beachfront estate in East Hampton, the exact same one where the wedding was held. The property was valued in the millions, but the mortgage recorded in the county files was only for $2 million. That meant Richard had $8 million in equity. equity he could easily tap into to pay for his daughter's wedding. He didn't need my money. He just wanted to control me. I spent the next hour drafting a formal response to Grayson's lawyer's cease and desist. It was a work of art, if I do say so myself. I cited case law, pointed out the glaring holes in their argument, and concluded with a paragraph that was equal parts warning and promise. Furthermore, my client reserves the right to pursue civil action against Mr. Sullivan and his associates for tortious interference, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Any further attempts at intimidation will be considered evidence of a pattern of harassment and will be presented to the court as such. Please advise your client to cease and desist from contacting my client directly or indirectly. All future communication must go through my office. I signed it as Eleanor Black and attached it to an email for Ray Sterling. Can you put this on your letterhead and send it? Make it official. His reply was instantaneous. On it. And Eleanor, brace yourself. This is going to get ugly. Ugly. I could handle ugly. I grew up in ugly. This wasn't ugly. This was just business. The rest of the day blurred into a haze of legal documents, online research, and carefully worded emails. I ate the rest of my cold toast and drank 3 more cups of terrible hotel coffee. By 5 in the afternoon, I had a complete timeline of events. I knew who ordered what, who paid whom, and exactly where the paper trail went cold. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a forest fire of circumstantial evidence. That night, I decided to treat myself. I left the hotel and walked 15 blocks to a quiet, unassuming little Italian joint that reminded me of my law school days in Chicago. The food was incredible, the wine was cheap, and the vibe was wonderfully normal. I ate a plate of linguine with clams and watched the couples around me holding hands, laughing, sharing their lives. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was distant, like remembering a dream. When I got back to my hotel room, there was a message waiting on the hotel voicemail. It was Martha. She sounded like she'd been crying. Eleanor, please. I don't know what's going on. Dad is screaming at everyone. Grayson is having a meltdown. My honeymoon is booked, and I think they're going to cancel it over this stupid bill. Just tell me what you want. If you want money, fine. Name your price. I just don't want my wedding ruined by all this drama. Call me. I deleted the message. I didn't want her money. I didn't want her pity. I wanted her to understand that the world didn't revolve around her and Daddy's bank account. I turned on the TV, flipping channels, until I landed on a rerun of a legal drama. I watched it with a glass of wine, picking apart the prosecution's case, finding the holes in their logic. It was a comforting ritual. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A news alert. I almost ignored it, but the headline caught my eye. Local real estate mogul faces IRS scrutiny amid ongoing family dispute. My blood ran cold. I clicked the link. The article was short, buried in the local section of the New York Post. It stated that sources close to the Sullivan family confirmed the IRS had launched a routine audit of Sullivan Holdings LLC, following anonymous tips regarding potential tax discrepancies tied to personal expenses. Anonymous tips. I smiled. I hadn't sent any tips. Not yet. But someone had. Someone wanted to kick the hornet's nest. Was it Bridget trying to save her own skin? Or someone else? Either way, the message was clear. The noose was tightening. I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I knew would give me the truth. Ray, I said when he answered, his voice rough. It's Eleanor. Have you seen the news? I've seen it, he said, sounding remarkably awake for a guy who'd just been dragged out of sleep. The timing is interesting. Too interesting, I agreed. Someone is trying to spook them, or someone is trying to help you, Ray replied. Either way, it accelerates the timeline. Now they're going to come at you with everything they've got. Grayson will be desperate. I know, I said, feeling a shiver of anticipation run down my spine. And I'm ready. I ended the call and stood in the middle of the room, bathed in the glow of the television. I thought about Grayson, about Richard, about their faces when they realized they couldn't bully me anymore. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old briefcase, the one I used to carry to court. Inside, right next to my law degree, lay a small silver letter opener. I ran my thumb along the sharp edge. Tomorrow, the gloves came off. Tomorrow, Eleanor Black would stop sending emails and start filing motions. I placed the letter opener on the desk next to my laptop. It gleamed in the lamplight like a silent promise. The $50,000 bill was just the opening salvo. The war had just begun, and I fully intended to collect every cent I was owed, plus interest. The morning sun did nothing to warm the steel trap my life had become. I woke up at 6 a.m. sharp, not to an alarm, but to a deeply ingrained habit forged during my years at Sterling and Pierce. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford right now, not when the opposition was already circling. I brewed a cup of the hotel's complimentary coffee, which tasted like burnt rubber, and sat down at the desk. My inbox was a war zone. Overnight, I had received 17 emails, 3 from Grayson, ranging in tone from pleading to threatening. 5 from Richard, all filtered through his personal assistant, demanding a family summit. And 9 from various wedding-related vendors, each more nervous than the last, begging for payment or clarification. I deleted Grayson's emails without reading them. I forwarded Richard's to Ray with a note, "Summit over my dead body," and I drafted a single unified response for the vendors. To whom it may concern, please direct all inquiries regarding payment for the Sullivan wedding to the offices of Richard Sullivan, care of Sullivan Holdings, LLC. My client, Eleanor Black Sullivan, is not responsible for any unauthorized expenses. Be advised that any further attempts to contact my client regarding this matter will be considered harassment and reported to the appropriate authorities. Sincerely, Ray Sterling, Esquire. Sterling and Pierce, LLP. I attached the letter Ray had sent the night before and hit send. Then I picked up the phone and called the one person who could give me a clear view of the battlefield. "Morning, sunshine," Ray's voice boomed through the receiver. He sounded like he'd been up for hours, probably already at his desk in the financial district. "I assume you've seen the circus?" I said, choking down my terrible coffee. "Any idea who leaked the financial story to the Post?" "Off the record," Ray said, lowering his voice. "Probably Bridget Sampson. She's desperate. She knows if this blows up, her license is toast. She's trying to throw the Sullivans under the bus to save herself." "Smart woman," I muttered. "Desperate, but smart." "Speaking of desperate," Ray continued, "Grayson just retained Teresa Gates." My hand froze in midair, the coffee mug hovering inches from my lips. Teresa Gates. The name was like a punch to the gut. She was the most feared divorce attorney in Manhattan, notorious for her scorched earth tactics and her ability to financially bury her opponents before a case even made it to court. She was also legendary for never losing. Hiring her wasn't a legal maneuver, it was a declaration of war. "He's not wasting time," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Neither are you," Ray replied. "Teresa is good. Arrogant, but good. She's going to try to drown you in paperwork and motions to dismiss. We need to be proactive. We need to strike first." "Agreed," I said, setting the mug down. The caffeine had suddenly lost all its appeal. What are my options? We have grounds for a tortious interference suit against Grayson for dragging you into that contract. We also have a solid case for fraudulent misrepresentation against Richard and the wedding planner. But the main course, the thing that's really going to get their attention, is the prenup. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. The prenup is ironclad. You said so yourself. It is, Ray confirmed, if we play by the rules. But every contract has a poison pill, a clause that can void it. In your case, it's Section 7B, subsection 4. I pulled up a scanned copy of the prenup on my screen. I hadn't read it in years. My eyes scanned the dense legalese until I found it. In the event of documented proof of infidelity by either party, coupled with financial mismanagement or deceit intended to deprive the other party of marital assets, the terms of this agreement shall be rendered null and void. Infidelity, financial mismanagement. I had both. The bracelet, the hidden accounts, the fake wedding bill. That's a high bar, I said, thinking out loud. We'd need irrefutable proof. We have the proof, Ray said. The question is whether you're ready to use it, because once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. You're divorcing him, Eleanor, for real. I stared at the words on the screen. Null and void. The prenup was my prison, and now I held the key. I've been divorced from him since the moment he let his father block my path in that driveway, I said, my voice icy and unwavering. File the papers, Ray. Today. The line was quiet for a moment. Then I heard the click of a pen. Consider it done. I'll have the initial petition ready by noon. But, Eleanor, get a good security system. Maybe a bodyguard. Teresa Gates plays dirty, and Grayson Sullivan is about to lose everything. Desperate men do stupid things. I hung up the phone. A strange calm washed over me. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. I wasn't fighting for a marriage anymore. I was fighting for my future. I spent the next 2 hours preparing. I gathered every piece of evidence I had. The photos of the girl in the red dress, the bank statements showing Grayson's hidden funds, the emails about the wedding bill, the audio recording of Richard admitting to creative accounting. I organized it all into a digital dossier labeled and time-stamped. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was the front desk. Miss Black, there's a courier here with a delivery for you. A delivery? I frowned. I wasn't expecting anything. All right, send him up. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I checked the peephole. A young man in a courier uniform stood there, holding a thick envelope. I opened the door. Eleanor Black? He asked. That's me. He handed me the envelope and a clipboard. Sign here, please. I scribbled my name and took the package. It was heavier than I expected. I closed the door and walked back to the desk. I broke the seal. Inside was a single document printed on expensive, heavy stock paper with the Gates and Associates logo. It was a summons. Grayson was suing me for divorce. The petition was brutal in its efficiency. It cited irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty, a laughable accusation given the circumstances. It demanded that I pay his legal fees. It demanded that I vacate our marital home in Chicago, the one I had decorated, maintained, and paid the mortgage on for years while he played startup founder. And at the very end, there was a demand for sole ownership of the East Hampton estate, claiming it was a premarital asset, despite the fact that I had contributed significantly to its upkeep and renovation. Teresa Gates had made her first move. I read through the whole thing, my lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't just trying to divorce me. He was trying to erase me, to pretend our 12-year marriage had never happened. I picked up the phone and dialed Ray's number. "He filed the petition," I said, stating the obvious. "I know," Ray replied, the clatter of his keyboard audible in the background. "Just got the electronic notification. It's ambitious." "It's a joke," I said, tossing the summons onto the desk. "He thinks he can bully me into folding." "Gates is running her usual playbook," Ray said. "She wants to intimidate you, make you settle early for crumbs. Don't fall for it." "I won't," I promised. "Did you get my email with the evidence?" "Just reviewing it now," he said. "It's solid. The photo of the bracelet is particularly damning, and the audio recording of Richard Masterstroke, can we use it?" "Well," I said, standing up and walking over to the window. The city was a concrete jungle, and I was about to become its apex predator. "Then let's give them something to really chew on. File our counterclaim today. Throw everything in. The infidelity, the financial fraud, the breach of the prenup. And Ray, make sure Teresa Gates gets a copy before the end of the day." I ended the call and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had arrived in New York 2 days ago. She was sharper, harder, ready. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a photo, a close-up of Grayson's hand holding the hand of a woman in a red dress. The text read, "He's so much happier now. You should go back to Chicago." I stared at the photo, then zoomed in. There, on the woman's wrist, was the diamond bracelet, and on Grayson's finger, a flash of a new tattoo, a small, intricate design I didn't recognize. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a fling, it was serious. It was Iris, and she was sending this to me from his phone. I saved the image, added it to the digital dossier, and then blocked the number. Let them think they were winning. Let them think they could intimidate me with cheap photos and cruel texts. Because when my counterclaim landed on Teresa Gates's desk, the look on Grayson's face was going to be priceless. I picked up the letter opener from my desk and ran my thumb along its edge one last time. Then I carefully slipped it into my purse. It was time to go to war. The rest of the day was a blur of legal formalities and strategic positioning. Ray's team at Sterling and Pierce worked with the terrifying silent efficiency of a surgical unit. At 3 p.m., I received a secure link to the draft of our counterclaim. I read it, and my eyes widened at its sheer magnitude. Ray hadn't just fired back. He had aimed straight for the solar plexus. The document was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It systematically dismantled Grayson's claims of emotional cruelty, presenting a mountain of evidence that painted him as the architect of his own misery. It quoted the poison pill clause of the prenup, word for word, attaching the photo of Iris's bracelet and the audio recording of Richard discussing tax fraud. But the real kill shot was buried on page 27. Ray had uncovered a series of wire transfers. Small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, moving from Grayson's corporate account to an offshore entity based in Delaware, routed through the Cayman Islands. The entity was called Redwood Ventures, LLC. It had no registered employees, no physical address, and no discernible business purpose, except, of course, to hide money. And the most recent transfer was for $500,000, dated 3 days after the wedding. A clear attempt to siphon assets out of the marital estate before divorce proceedings could freeze them. It was a classic maneuver, and it was going to cost him dearly. I called Ray immediately. "Redwood Ventures," I said, my voice tight with a mix of fury and dark satisfaction. "Are you sure it's his?" "Absolutely positive," Ray said, the sound of paper shuffling in the background. "We got lucky. He used his personal Gmail account to set up the initial wire instructions, and it was linked to his old laptop, which we managed to subpoena records from. He thought he was being clever, using a personal device for business. He was just being stupid. Stupid and greedy, I muttered. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. There were grounds for criminal charges. Wire fraud, tax evasion, the list kept growing. We're going to freeze those assets, Ray assured me. The judge is going to sign the order this afternoon, and when we drop this on Gates, she'll have no choice but to advise her client to settle. I hoped he was right, but I also knew Teresa Gates. She didn't advise her clients to settle. She fought to the bitter end, no matter how untenable her position was. And just as I expected, at 4:55 p.m., my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was before I answered. "Eleanor Black?" I said, my voice clear and professional. "Miss Black, this is Teresa Gates." Her voice was exactly as I had imagined it, smooth, polished, and entirely devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a woman who charged $1,000 an hour and expected you to thank her for it. "Miss Gates, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I just finished reviewing your, let's call it creative counterclaim," she said, a hint of amusement in her tone. "I must say, it's rare to see such a spectacular collection of half-truths and innuendo strung together so artfully." "They aren't innuendos, Miss Gates," I fired back, keeping my voice steady. "They're evidence. Affidavits, forensic accounting, and a clear pattern of financial misconduct. Your client is facing criminal charges, not just a divorce settlement." She let out a short, brittle laugh. "My client is a pillar of the community, Miss Black, a successful entrepreneur. These are the desperate accusations of a woman who abandoned her career to play trophy wife. Do you really think a judge is going to believe a man like Grayson Sullivan needs to hide $500,000 from his wife?" $500,000, I repeated, letting the lie hang in the air. "You think that's all of it? Because our forensic accountant has tracked down closer to $2.5 million, Miss Gates. And the transfers span 4 years." I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she recalculated her strategy. $2.5 million is a significant allegation," she finally said, her tone cooling slightly. "If you have proof—" "I have it," I interrupted, "and it will be presented in discovery, right alongside the evidence of his affair, which I'm sure you'll agree voids the prenup. So let's drop the posturing, Miss Gates. You know as well as I do that your client is in a hole, and he's still digging." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was low and dangerous. "You are making a very big mistake, Eleanor. You think you can take on the Sullivan family? You think you can destroy Grayson and walk away with a fortune? You're about to find out exactly how powerful we are. I suggest you reconsider your position before you force my hand." "I'm not forcing your hand, Miss Gates," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "Your client did that all by himself, the moment he decided to betray his wife and steal from his family. Have a good evening." I hung up, my heart hammering against my ribs. That was it. The gauntlet had been thrown. Teresa Gates had just pivoted from legal maneuvering to direct threats, which meant I was winning. I spent the rest of the night in my hotel room, a prisoner of my own making. I ordered room service, a rare steak and a baked potato, and ate it at the desk while I worked. I was building my case, organizing every piece of evidence, creating timelines, and drafting witness lists. I was preparing for a trial, not just a settlement conference, because I knew, deep down in my soul, that this was going to end up in a courtroom. Around 9 p.m., I decided to take a break. I needed to clear my head. I changed into workout gear and headed down to the hotel gym. It was a wonderfully quiet sanctuary of squeaking machines and stale air. I got on the treadmill and cranked up the incline to a punishing degree, pushing my body until my lungs burned and my legs screamed. It was the only way I knew to silence the noise in my head. I was on mile 4 when the gym door opened. I looked in the mirror, and my stride faltered for a fraction of a second before I forced myself to keep going. It was Iris. She was wearing impossibly tight leggings and a sports bra that probably cost more than my monthly rent in Chicago. She was holding a water bottle and glaring at me with a mix of defiance and, was that pity? She walked over to the elliptical machine right next to mine, the one that always squeaked. "Hi, Eleanor," she said, her voice breathy and falsely sweet. "What a coincidence, running into you here." I didn't slow down. "Iris, I didn't realize you were part of the starving artist demographic now. Or did Grayson buy you a day pass?" Her smile tightened. "I could say the same about you. I thought you were some top-tier lawyer. Shouldn't you be, I don't know, working instead of playing around on a treadmill?" "I am working," I said, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "I'm building a case against your boyfriend. It takes time." She rolled her eyes, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her reflection. "Are you really going to do this? Are you going to drag this out and make everyone miserable?" "Everyone?" I repeated. "Or just you and Grayson?" She sighed, a dramatic sound of a misunderstood victim. "Look, I get it. You're hurt. But you need to accept that Grayson has moved on. He's with me now, and we're serious." "Serious enough to get matching tattoos?" I asked, my voice dripping with ice. "The one on his ribs. The one that says E plus G." Her face went white. She didn't know. Or maybe she thought it was just a coincidence. Either way, the lie was exposed. "What do you want, Eleanor?" she snapped, her sweet mask finally cracking. "Money? Is that it? You want to bleed him dry and then crawl back to Chicago with your tail between your legs." "I want justice," I said, slowing the treadmill down to a walk and finally turning to face her. "And I want what's mine. And for your information, Iris, the next time you decide to text your rival a picture of your boyfriend's hand, you might want to make sure your own wrist isn't in the shot. That bracelet is pretty recognizable." I nodded toward the diamond bracelet sparkling on her wrist, the exact same one I'd found in Grayson's car. Her hand flew to her wrist, her eyes widening in horror. I grabbed my towel and my water bottle. As I stepped off the treadmill, I leaned in just close enough for her to hear me over the hum of the machines. "Have a good run," I murmured. "It might be your last one as a free woman." I walked out of the gym, leaving her standing there, staring at her wrist in shock. Back in my room, I checked my phone. A single text from an unknown number. "You bitch." I smiled. Let her stew in her own fear. Let them all stew. I had a long night ahead of me. He made the first move. I had just checkmated his queen. Now it was time to go after the king. The adrenaline from the showdown with Iris at the gym had faded by midnight, leaving behind a familiar gnawing emptiness. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a live wire, sparking with connections, implications, and the ghost of her face when I mentioned the bracelet. So I did what any sane person would do at 1 a.m. in a strange hotel room. I got to work. I popped my laptop open again, the glow of the screen cutting through the darkness. The dossier on Grayson was growing, but it was still missing a crucial piece: the family. Richard Sullivan wasn't just a pompous father-in-law. He was the head of a real estate empire, built on a foundation that was starting to look less like solid rock and more like quicksand. I needed to know the depth of the rot. I logged into the Suffolk County Clerk's online database, a public repository of property deeds, liens, and corporate filings. It was a treasure trove for anyone willing to dig, and I was more than willing. I started with Sullivan Holdings, LLC, running a comprehensive search of all properties associated with the company. Most of it was legit: beachfront mansions, commercial real estate, a portfolio of rental properties. But 3 records caught my eye. They were industrial lots located in less desirable parts of Long Island, far from the manicured lawns of the wealthy enclaves. According to the records, they belonged to Sullivan Holdings, but they were valued significantly lower than comparable properties in the area, and each had a massive recent mortgage attached to it. I cross-referenced the mortgage lenders. They weren't traditional banks. They were small, storefront lending companies with names like Coastal Capital Solutions and Equity Group. A quick search revealed that these companies specialized in high-risk, high-interest loans that were often predatory. And the borrower on all 3 loans wasn't Sullivan Holdings, LLC. It was Richard Sullivan personally. He had mortgaged his personal assets to prop up failing commercial deals. That explained the desperation over the wedding money. He wasn't just cheap, he was in trouble. I dug deeper. I found financing records showing Richard had used his personal stock portfolio as collateral for those loans. And if the stock market dipped, or if one of his properties went under, he'd be forced to sell. Everything he owned was leveraged up to his eyeballs. The Sullivan family fortune wasn't a fortress, it was a house of cards, and the wind was starting to blow. I compiled the evidence into a new folder, labeling it Richard Sullivan, Financial Exposure. Then I turned my attention back to the man who started this whole mess, my soon-to-be ex-husband. I needed to know more about Redwood Ventures, LLC. Delaware was notoriously secretive, but I wasn't without resources. I had a friend from law school, a brilliant forensic accountant named Kenji Tanaka, who now ran his own firm, specializing in international asset recovery. I sent him a secure message with the wire transfer details and the name of the shell company. Within an hour, he replied, "Redwood Ventures is a classic shell game. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington. No beneficial owners listed. But I ran the transaction patterns through our AI model. The IP addresses used to initiate the transfers aren't coming from Delaware. They're bouncing through servers in Toronto and London before landing at a residential address right here in Manhattan. Want to guess whose residential address that is?" My blood ran cold. I already knew. I typed back, "Bingo." Specifically, his Soho penthouse, the one he told me he sold 2 years ago. Looks like he just transferred the deed to an LLC he controls and kept living there. The plot thickens. Kenji sent me a screenshot of the data. It was irrefutable. Grayson hadn't just hidden money. He'd hidden a property. A multi-million-dollar asset. And if he lied about that, what else was he hiding? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The net was closing. Every move they made, every lie they told, only served to tangle them further. They were amateur criminals, sloppy and arrogant, believing their own hype. It was almost too easy. At almost 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a video call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. The screen was black for a moment. Then, an image appeared. It was shaky, poorly lit. It was Grayson's Soho apartment. I recognized the view from the window, the layout of the kitchen. And there on the counter was a bottle of that 40-year-old Macallan, Richard's favorite. Then the camera swung, and I saw them. Grayson and Iris were having a screaming match. "You said she was bluffing!" Iris hissed, her face contorted with rage. "You said she wouldn't fight. Now look at this mess! My dad is calling me asking if it's true." "I'm handling it," Grayson yelled, slamming his hand on the counter. The whiskey bottle wobbled dangerously. "Teresa is the best. She'll bury her." Bury her. She just slapped us with a counterclaim that includes a motion to freeze your assets. Do you even realize what that means? It means you can't pay your own lawyers. You can't pay your rent. Are you broke, Grayson? "I'm not broke," he roared, grabbing the bottle and taking a swig straight from it. "I have money. I have investments." "Liar," Iris screamed. "Your dad is broke. He mortgaged everything up to his eyeballs. He was the one who needed the wedding money, and now you've dragged me into this. I'm going to get deposed. My name is going to be in the papers." Grayson's face twisted with rage. He lunged at her, grabbing her by the arm. "Shut up. Just shut up. You're nothing but a gold digger anyway. You're lucky I even look at you." Iris shrieked, trying to pull away. The camera swung violently, then crashed to the floor with a thud. The video ended in a shower of static. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding against my ribs. I rewound the video, watching it over and over again. I saved it to my encrypted drive. This wasn't just evidence, it was a confession. A domestic dispute caught on tape, complete with admissions of financial distress, emotional abuse, and a clear motive for Iris to turn on him. I forwarded the video to Ray with a single note: Exhibit A. Then I did something I'd been planning since the moment Richard blocked my path in the driveway. I drafted an email to an address I found on the IRS whistleblower portal. I attached the property records for the 3 industrial lots, the details of the predatory loans, and a summary of Richard's financial exposure. I didn't include Grayson's name or the divorce proceedings. This was purely about Richard and his potential tax fraud. It was clean, it was legal, and it was devastating. I hit send. An hour later, as the first gray light of dawn started creeping over Manhattan, my phone rang. It was Ray. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "Define sleep," I said, rubbing my eyes. "I just got off the phone with Teresa Gates," he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "She's rattled. She received our motion to freeze assets along with Kenji's forensic report, and apparently, her client had a heated argument with his girlfriend last night that was accidentally recorded." "Accidentally," I murmured. "Let's just say it's compelling evidence," Ray said. "Gates is advising her client to settle. She says the case is unwinnable." My heart leaped. "So we have them." "Not exactly," Ray cautioned. "Grayson is refusing to settle. He insists on taking it to trial, convinced he can still intimidate you. He's digging his heels in." Of course he was. He was cornered. Cornered animals were the most dangerous. "Keep pushing for a settlement," I said, my voice hardening. "But prepare for trial, because if he wants a fight, I'm going to give him one he will never forget." I ended the call and stood up, stretching the ache out of my back. I walked over to the window, watching the city wake up below. Somewhere out there, Grayson was probably nursing a hangover and a bruised ego. Richard was probably staring at his mounting debts. Iris was probably looking for an exit strategy. Let them squirm. Let them conspire and lie to each other, because I had the one thing they couldn't buy or bully: the truth. And in a few hours, the entire Sullivan family was going to learn a very painful lesson about what happens when you underestimate a woman who no longer has anything to lose. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person who could deliver the final blow. "Kenji," I said when he answered. I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to find every piece of real estate Richard Sullivan owns, every loan he's taken out, and every tax loophole he's exploited. And I need it yesterday. Consider it done, Kenji said, his voice grim. This is going to ruin him. I know, I said, a cold smile brushing my lips. That's the point. I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who arrived in New York 2 days ago. She was a weapon, a scalpel, and the Sullivan family was about to go under the knife. I made the first move. They would make the last, and it would be checkmate. By 9 a.m., the city was a symphony of chaos. Honking horns, sirens, the distant wail of a fire truck. I had showered, dressed in a sleek charcoal gray pantsuit I'd ordered with rush delivery from Saks Fifth Avenue, and was sitting at my makeshift command center waiting for the fallout. The suit was a statement. It said litigator, not decorative wife. It said power. My phone buzzed. A text from Ray. Gates just called. Wants to meet today. 2 p.m., her office. I stared at the text. This was the first real negotiation. I typed a single word. Accepted. Then I called Kenji. He answered on the first ring, sounding like he'd pulled an all-nighter. Knowing Kenji, he probably had. Tell me you have good news, I said. I have interesting news, he replied, the sound of his keyboard clacking in the background. I finished the deep dive into Richard Sullivan's finances. It's worse than we thought. He has nearly $20 million in personal debt, all tied to those shady private lenders. And the interest rates, Eleanor? They're predatory. Some are pushing 18%. Is he hemorrhaging cash? Can he declare bankruptcy? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Not without losing everything, Kenji said. His personal guarantee on the Sullivan Holdings loans means if the LLC defaults, they can come after his personal assets. His houses, his cars, his art collection, and there's a clause in his partnership